Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and we are back talking about Big Brother Canada 10, and I'm finally here with my mid-season power ranking, and this is possibly one of the hardest mid-season power rankings I've ever had to do, where there's just so much in flux with this house, and really that's what it is with BBCan 10, where this is one of the most dynamic houses possibly in the history of the show. Like, I really cannot think of the last time that we've rarely had a set power structure throughout the entire pre-jury phase of the game. I mean, in many ways, this is playing out in a similar way to BBCan 9, which is a notably crazy season. However, I feel like this season's even more insane, where at least with BBCan 9, from relatively early on, like even after the Sunsetters blew up, we still had a definitive two sides. We had the Ty, Jed, and Beth side facing off against the Kyle, Roe, Austin, Braden side of things, where you had like Tina and Tara in the middle that were siding towards the Kyle group, while also you had Victoria and Kiefer siding towards the Jed and Ty group. And it was a more structured house, despite all the craziness that happened within it, than this one, where we're just now getting to a point where it's somewhat similar to that. I mean, all the way in, the 7th round of the game? Like, this is really unprecedented, where, again, like, the game does start off similarly, where we had this, like, majority group in the Savage 7 come together, but then Kyle just blows everything up through his HOH. And really, since then, the house hasn't really been able to have a set structure until this last week, where Kevin's trying to create these sides, but even then, like, these sides are not solid. Where again, you have this like Gino, Jacey, Marty side, where Marty doesn't really care about Gino, he just voted for Gino. And then on the other side, you have like the Summer, Betty, Hermon, Moose side, where Hermon and Summer don't even really want to be working together, and Hermon and Moose have some distrust with each other from earlier events. And then we've now had this like recent grouping of Kevin, Helena, and Josh coming together, but even they aren't that safe, with there being potential people on both sides that would think about targeting them. So really, this entire season is just completely up for grabs still, and it is part of what makes the season as entertaining as it is, but also makes it very hard to analyze from a game perspective. But still, with this ranking here, I will be ranking every player left in game based on how likely I feel like they are to win this season at this point. Now, I am recording this the day before this video comes out in the morning, after we have had the latest HOH results and very preliminary talk about who they are going to target. So by the time this video even comes out, it might be outdated, but it is what it is. Now, before we get into the ranking itself, I do want to talk about the players evicted and my thoughts on them so far. And we'll start that with the first boot in Melina, who I was disappointed to see go out first. I mean, I don't know how much game ability she really had, where she did seem to be a bit of an outlier in the house, where I don't know how many connections she really had, but she did seem like a likable figure, but also one that like just didn't really seem to know the game that much. Which, I mean, really, that seems to be the modern casting style of Big Brother Canada, is casting a good chunk of people who don't know much about the game, but are very willing to play the game, which I think is what's led to the craziness of the last two seasons at this point. Then we got Jay, who did have more of an impact on the season. I feel like Jay got decent content on the show and seemed like a player that probably would have done better had they just been a bit more active early on, where I don't feel like they just did enough early on to build the relationships that they needed to with the majority of the house, where I think they are very good socially and good at building bonds with the people that they tried to build bonds with, but just didn't really try with enough people. And I feel like that is their major downside there. But again, someone I think probably would have some potential if they were to play again, but obviously probably not going to happen. Next up, we got Steph. And I mean, Steph was there. Steph was one of the more quieter house guests coming into week 3, but obviously she's the victim of the Kyle HOH, which we'll get to Kyle. I'm really, again, like the most memorable stuff about Steph is her blindside and her reaction to her finding out she's going on the block, which was humorous. Outside of that, was a very passive player and never really seemed to be well integrated within the house, so don't know if there was that much potential there. Next, we're moving on to Kyle, and I don't know if I've ever seen someone blow up their game so much over the course of their HOH week, where obviously there's this discourse over, is Kyle the person that had the worst HOH of all time? And at first I was like, probably not, because like at least he comes out of it with like Gino and Jacey still on his side, kind of, even though that eventually doesn't even go through by the end of the next week. But the more I think about it, I think it is. Like, I mean, again, there's never been this big of a downfall from one week to the other, where like in these other HOHs that are normally mentioned as the worst of all time, you got Frenchie, who again still at least was able to set up a power structure and came out of the week not being the number one target. It's really his work in week 2 that caused him to be the target. You have Devin, who, again, comes out of the week being the number one target for pretty much everybody. However, he also came into that week being the number one target for pretty much anybody. So it's like there isn't that much of a downfall there. It's just that he continued his negative trajectory in the game. Kyle here is someone that came into the week debatably the best position in the game. Like, to me, he was number 2 in my power ranking behind Gino coming into his HOH week, with him being the more active player of the two, being really in the center of the house alongside Gino, and would have also benefited from all the relationships that Gino was making with people that he wasn't as close to, while again being like the brain of the operation there. But again, for him to go from being one of the best positioned people in the house to being the near consensus target for the next week is insane. Like, it is insane how much he blows up his game throughout his HOH week. And for him to eventually go home from his own closest ally winning HOH and then taking him out himself is, again, also just insane. Like, it is insane how bad Kyle's game is, particularly in that last 2 weeks. But again, when people mention that Kyle is one of the worst players of all time, I don't necessarily agree with that still. Again, I still feel like he did very impressive work in the first 2 weeks that keep him out of that conversation. But again, those back 2 weeks are so bad that it definitely does obviously harm his overall potential in the game. Next up, we're moving on to Tanisha. And Tanisha is someone that I was very disappointed in. I mean, coming into the season, I did expect Tanisha to be a very social player, but I also felt like there was going to be some savviness to her, and there really wasn't. I mean, she was just social. I mean, she was a very social player in the sense that she was good at building one-on-one bonds, had very strong relationships with people like a Summer and a Betty, a Hermon, a Moose, and again, that's effective work there. However, she just completely sticks to her own group, to where everyone notices that she's social, but because she's not talking game to the majority of the house, that makes people interpret that, oh, she's talking game to everyone else, but not me, which makes her a very easy person to be the scapegoat for that side of the house in terms of who is the most dangerous there, where you have like someone like a Summer who does very similar things to Tanisha, but does actively talk game to a lot of the house, and through that they feel safer because Summer is talking game to them, while with Tanisha she's not. And because of that, it's like, how do you really trust this person that isn't talking game with you? And a lot of that's because, like, I don't think there is game with Tanisha. I don't know how much game there really is within her. She didn't really seem to even try to play the game that much. And the only time she went out to play the game a bit more was when she was a possible renom, and even then she plays pretty poorly. So I feel like she's a player that, like, is good socially, especially in terms of the social ability that you would need in the outside world. But I think for Big Brother, I just don't think anything really clicked here. And I did find that kind of underwhelming. And finally, we got the latest boot in Jess, who also very underwhelmed by Jess across season. Really came off as a pretty bad player here. One that, again, like, I don't think is the worst strategically in the world. I think they get the strategic game to a degree. I think there's someone that, like, I would obviously benefit from having better reads in the house. But I think there's someone that, if they had the correct reads, would probably know what to do. But I mean, they're just so bad socially. I mean, really didn't click with anyone. I mean, when they thought Kevin was their closest ally, and Kevin is just so willing to get rid of her, I mean, that is obviously a very bad sign. I mean, really, once the safety chain double eviction got announced, it felt very clear that Jess was probably going home, as they were really on the bottom of both sides, where neither side was really going to be willing to go out of their way to save her, especially with like how much intermingling there is between the sides, to where it just felt like Jess was the clear outlier there. And really, I feel like they handled their HOH week pretty poorly. Obviously, they do target Hermon and Moose, and both of them end up staying in the house. Mind you, I don't think Tanisha is the worst target in the world, but I do feel like for someone like Jess, it definitely burns a bridge in a position where she didn't really need to, especially when, again, Moose and Hermon are directly targeting her. And obviously, you have to give a lot of that credit to Kevin, who does make a move that is more optimal for him personally in getting rid of Tanisha. But again, for Jess, definitely not the correct move. And really just, again, overall underwhelmed with her as a player. But there we go. We are down to the final 10. So with that, let's get into the power ranking. I'll be ranking every player left in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. And again, this is very tough right now where the house is still very dynamic, and despite the recent developments of Marty winning HOH, I still don't fully know where it's going to go. Obviously, by the time this video comes out, we'll know noms. Not too long after the video comes out, we'll know who won the veto. And obviously things will be more set in stone at that point in terms of this individual week. But even then, beyond this week, I still feel like there's so much up for grabs. I think this is kind of a similar situation to BB Can 9, where I think the people that are most likely to win the game are the people that are in the most danger in the game. And I feel like that's obviously shaking things up with this power ranking. But we're going to start off, though, with number 10 here, the bottom place person, the person I think is the least likely to win the game. And that is a person that I think is still potentially in danger, but also someone I don't really have much faith in ever winning the game, and that person is Betty. Now, Betty is a fun character. I do really enjoy Betty on the show. She is a very different character for the show, being someone that just cannot hide her emotions at all. And I find that a lot of fun. However, as a player, I think she's pretty bad. And really, Betty's been on the bottom of my power rankings pretty much every single week. And a lot of the reason for that is I just cannot imagine the jury rewarding Betty the win. I feel like Betty is just looked at as kind of a joke at this point, as this easy goat to take to the end, with her being terrible at competitions, her again taking everything so personally to where you can't really credit her that much strategically. Though at the same time, there have been talks about targeting Betty even over summer because they assume that Betty is playing more strategically, which I guess I think this comes down to Betty not really talking game with the people that are saying those things. But again, the fact that Betty is such a clear goat to most people in the house, but also is still a target to a lot of the house, I think is just a terrible sign. Or again, there's potential for her going home this week, where Marty seems to be very upset at Josh and Betty over what happened at double eviction for some reason, and Betty could very likely be going home this week. But again, at the same time, I just cannot see the jury actually respecting the game that she is playing. But then again, I said the exact same thing about Tara and BB Can 9. Where Tara at this point in the game was also a very clear go, but Tara did pick it up towards the end game, won a lot of comps, was the person to get rid of Jed and Kiefer, two of the biggest players in the game, and through that got a lot of credibility to where she supposedly would have won against both Brayden and Ty at the end had she gotten to the end. So again, obviously perceptions can change over time if Betty really kicks it up, but I just have no faith in Betty based off what I've seen. So again, I had to leave her here at number 10. Now number 9, we're moving on to again, another player that isn't necessarily the worst positioned right now, but is someone that, again, I have very little faith in them winning the game, and that person is Jacey-Lynne. And Jacey's kind of in a weird spot here, where, again, she is not in danger for this week, though I do think in future weeks she could potentially be in danger, where there's already a lot of talk about targeting the showmance. And if Gino and Jacey end up on the block, there's a level of potential for Jacey going home in that situation. But especially if Gino wins the veto, I think Jacey is in a very precarious spot at that point. So again, she's definitely someone that's in danger in future rounds. But even beyond that, again, I don't know if the jury's going to respect Jacey by the end. Now, I see it being more reasonable to see Jacey going on a comp run and then getting some respect through that towards the end game than Betty, where Betty, again, has not really done well in any competition. While Jacey has won, 2 comps so far? It's I can see Jacey pulling out a comp run towards the end and maybe have this Paris-like trajectory at the end game. But again, based on the current game position, I still struggle seeing Jacey winning the game. Now, I will say that I do think Jacey has been kind of on and off in the game. She's someone that does spend a lot of time, not doing anything. But there's other times where she does do decent work. I think in week 2, after she had been nominated, she did decent work at trying to re-solidify bonds afterwards and kind of recognize the mistakes that she made that caused her to go on a block to begin with. But then after that, she again, just kind of falls asleep. She gets blindsided at the Steph vote, but then kind of kicked it up to gear again in the last week, where she built such a strong bond with Jess to the point where Jess didn't want to target Gino and Jacey because of their bond. And she's a decent bond with Helena, obviously has a great bond with Gino. So she's not dead in the water by any means. Really, no one in this house is completely dead. But again, just in terms of their current game position and my faith in their overall game ability, I feel like Jacey has to be left here at number 9. Now number 8, and this is one that did kind of surprise me at how low this person ended up landing, considering this person's been relatively high in my power rankings for quite a while. However, I think we're at the point in the season where, again, I just find it very tough to believe that this person's going to win, despite them being one of the better positioned players in the house. So at number 8, we do have Helena. And again, it's weird to have her this low when she is part of this Kevin, Josh, Helena group, this group that is in the middle of the house, while also being the safest of that grouping, with literally no one talking about targeting Helena, and her having some bonds with both sides, though to be fair, she kind of just blindsided Summer and Betty. But again, like, she's not in the worst position in the world. To be honest, she's probably one of the safest people on the board in terms of longevity in the game. It's just, again, like, I don't know if she can win. Like, I feel like Helena, just her overall personality is one that I think makes her come off kind of clueless, which isn't the case, but I mean, like, is a perception that I think people will have, is that they think that she's kind of like weak-minded and that she's like easily influenced. But then even beyond that, I just feel like almost everyone else is more likely to win a jury vote against her. Where, again, like, she is in a very tight duo with Kevin, where, like, I think Kevin beats Helena, has a good bond with Marty. I think Marty beats Helena. If she somehow gets to the end with Josh, Josh will be Helena. Really, I mean, everyone left on the board in this player ranking at this point, I think, would beat Helena at the end. And that's why I have to leave her this far back, is because, again, like, I just feel like naturally, in terms of a jury vote, I just don't know how well she would do there, despite her being very well positioned in the game. That being said, though, again, she could have a bit of an underdog run at the end. She could have this, like, Paris run where at the very end she wins the last few comps, gains some respect from that. And I think the more game-savvy players there will recognize her playing the middle, and, like, maybe she could win in that position. But again, she would have to be against people other than the people that she's playing and going to the end with. I don't know. Like, I'm just very conflicted on Helena's game at this point, with her being very well positioned, but I just don't see the winning trajectory for her personally. And really, just in the grand scheme of things as a player, I do think she's a bit too passive as well. I don't like how much she's trying to play the middle, in the sense that she's, like, kind of afraid to be in a power structure, it seems like. Where, like, I remember back in the Kyle HOH, she was, like, very upset at Kyle for blowing up all the power structures in the house, even though that was, like, very beneficial to Helena, as she wasn't in many of those power structures. So I just don't know if she has, like, the true killer instinct she's going to need to win the game either. So again, like, I have to leave her here at number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to a player that, again, I think is more likely to win the game at the end. Probably actually more likely to win than a few other people we're about to be talking about. But it's like, how do they get there? I think it's a very tough road, and that person is Moose. And again, Moose is someone that, again, had 2 very close calls in recent weeks. Again, Kyle tried to target him. He won the veto. This last week, he really gets saved by this misconception about T's game. But now he's coming into this week seeming like he has a pretty strong, like, underdog story if he gets to the end. And also, like, seeming to not be the target right now. It doesn't seem like Marty has Moose on his radar as a person to target. And again, like, beyond this, like, we're at the final 9. He still has allies in Hermon, Summer, and Betty. And while, like, again, like, his relationship with Hermon is kind of tenuous due to him having backstabbed Hermon earlier in the game, and even Summer and Betty aren't the most solid allies, like, he's still not really in a terrible position at this point. But I feel like he is going to need to comp out to the end. Like, he has no real true solid allies. He has no one that is actually going to take him to the end at this point. Or again, at this point, like, who's he have? Like, his closest ally is possibly Hermon, who again is someone that doesn't fully trust him and actually just voted him out. Like, at that point, like I was saying, it's Josh, someone that has so many other options and could also be a potential boot this week. Like, I mean, Moose has no end game, and I think that's the issue there. However, I think he's someone that is a very likely winner if he gets to the end, and also probably has the ability to comp out at a point. So again, it's not like he has no potential to win there. I do think he is probably a more likely winner than the 3 people we just talked about, even though some of them have more solid end games than him. But again, like, for me, Moose, it's just not all there to where I have to leave him here at number 7. Now, number 6, we're moving on to a player that I think is probably one of the best players on this cast. I think this is a person that, if he had been on a more normal season, the season that wasn't as sporadic as this one is, I think he would be probably number 1 on this power ranking. And I think if he had played in a recent, like, Big Brother US season, he would also be number 1 in that power ranking. But again, with how crazy the season has been and how crazy BB Can seasons in general have been in recent years, he is left down here, and that person is Hermon. And again, Hermon, I think, is one of the few people in this house that plays to the current meta of Big Brother. Again, the current meta of building a power structure, controlling that power structure from the beginning, and just steamrolling till the end. Again, this thing that on BBUS we've seen been executed so many times in recent seasons, where we've seen the Cookout do it. We've seen Cody dominate the game, Derek, obviously, Tyler, Paul. They've all dominated the game in very similar ways, and Hermon is someone that tried to do that very early on and seemed to be on pace to do that, but then Kyle blew up the game, and obviously that does play a major factor. Also, I mean, to be fair, Hermon also was never as well positioned as those people, like someone like Moose wanting to target him very early on as well. And again, I think that is largely due to the fact that I think a lot of these players on this cast don't know what they're doing, which has led to a more crazy game and one that is less controllable than the way that Hermon wants to play. And again, that's why he's down here at number 6, is because he's one of the bigger targets on the board right now. Like, he is a person that, I mean, he did make a deal with Marty to where he should be safe this week, but still, I mean, this alliance of Kevin, Helena, and Josh do want to target Hermon moving forward. Really, I mean, they want to target him this week and last week, but obviously he won the veto last week, and who knows if this week will be successful. But as of right now, it doesn't seem like that's going through. But Hermon really is just such a big target on the board, and again, he has done effective work in him building a bond with Gino to where Gino doesn't want to target Hermon. He's still obviously remained close enough with his own side where they're not directly targeting him, people like a Summer, Betty, and Moose. However, I also feel like he hasn't done as good of a work in solidifying that group as what he should have, to where, again, like him and Summer are not wanting to work together, where like he's openly been trying to make alliances that exclude her because he doesn't like that she's throwing comps. I feel like that tension between those two is probably going to boil over at some point, to where like I think if Hermon was on the block against anybody that Summer's like relatively close to, I think she'd be very willing to let go of Hermon. So again, like I think Hermon is in a lot of danger moving forward. However, again, like he has proven time and time again that he's able to get himself out of sticky situations, whether that be through just winning the veto or making deals with the opposite side. Like, he has been able to remain safe for most of this season. And again, that is very impressive considering how quickly his power structure crumbled after week 2. So again, like, I mean, Hermon is a very conflicting figure here for me, where I think if Hermon gets to the end, again, I think he is very likely to win the game. To be honest, he's probably one of the most likely people to win the game if he's able to get to the end at this point, but again, is also in a kind of similar position to Moose, where I don't think he has a solid path to the end. I don't think anyone is taking him to the end. I think he is going to have to win out, but I have more faith in Hermon than I do with Moose, where Hermon is, again, shown a lot of game ability across the season. I do think he is one of the better players on the board, and because I leave him here at number 6. Now, number 5. At number 5, we have, again, another one I'm conflicted about, which, again, is really most of this cast, but it's someone that I think is also in a bit of danger moving forward, but I think also has a more solidified backing, even though, again, there's definitely worlds where he's targeted next week, and that person is Gino. Now, again, Gino versus Hermon, which one's higher? I think it's up for debate. To be honest, I could definitely see the argument for Hermon being higher. However, I do feel like there are more people targeting Hermon than Gino. However, Gino is also in a precarious spot. Obviously, he is part of the showmance with Jace, that there's a lot more talk nowadays about wanting to target them, especially now that we're reaching kind of the end game, and again, having 2 people tied at the hip is very dangerous. And I mean, like, who's going to be voted out there, Gino or Jace? You would think it would be Gino, though. I mean, I'll say the one thing that is benefiting Gino is the fact that he does have some pretty integral connections here. I mean, again, he has this bond with Hermon, to where I do think Hermon would want to keep him around kind of as a meat shield as well. Also have his relationship with Summer that could also help keep him around. We have his relationship with Marty, which is very tenuous, but again, it's at least something. He obviously has JC 100%, so it's like, again, like, he has a decent backing around him, and again, I think he's someone that could still win a jury vote if he gets to the end. Now, I think if he's up against like a Moose or Hermon, who are more active players than him, I think probably would have a tougher road, but I mean, he's someone that is just so well liked by this house, and really in a way that blew my mind early on. Like, again, he was number 1 in my power rankings for the first 2 weeks, just due to how well positioned he was in the game, despite the fact that he was doing nothing in the game. Like, I mean, yes, he was being included in all these big alliances, and again, he was at the center of the house alongside Kyle, but again, he did very little active work in that, but everyone just loved him, and it really made no sense to me. But I do think that is a factor still even now, where people do just like Gino. And I think that could lead to him potentially winning if he gets it again, despite him not being the most active player in the world. That being said, I mean, I really disagree with a lot of the game moves he's made across the season, specifically in his HOH week. I mean, I think him getting rid of Kyle is such a dumb move. And again, like, people try to say, oh, it gives him leverage with the rest of the house. But it's like, it also doesn't, though, because they immediately talked about targeting him not even like a day after he put Kyle on the block. Like, nominating your own ally is never an effective strategy, especially this early on in the game. Again, if you're in the end game, they're a bigger threat, okay. But again, this early on in the game, in a game of Big Brother, a game where the HOH changes every single week and that determines who the nominations are, having someone like Kyle, who you know isn't going to put you up, is so much more beneficial than gaining a tiny bit of leverage with the rest of the house in terms of something you can guilt them over, which they won't even feel guilted over. Like, I mean, to me, it's just such a dumb move to put Kyle on the block, and it almost backfired on him. Had certain people, specifically like a Betty or a Tanisha, had one HOH. And obviously it's like working out for him now to a degree, where again, like, he's still someone that's likely to win the game if he gets to the end and is a bit deeper in the game and still like isn't that poorly positioned. But I still disagree with that move so much. As again, like, even at the time, it was like, oh, I don't want to be nominated against Kyle, and then Kyle wins the veto. You're in a similar spot now with, like, Jace, and if not even Marty. Like, you're still in that same position, just swapping out people. Like, really, I mean, again, to me, the Kyle thing gained him no leverage. So, like, I don't know how much faith I really have in his strategic ability across the season. But again, he is really good socially, and isn't in as much direct danger to me as like Hermon and Moose. So again, he's slightly above them here at number 5. Now number 4, I mean, this is a person I can't believe they're this high, considering I also disagree with a lot of the game moves this person has made, but they are currently the HOH. And they're also someone that could win the game, and that person is Marty. And again, like, I completely disagree with a lot of the moves that Marty has made across this season. He is someone that is way too honest and just leaks information that he really should not be leaking at multiple points throughout the season. However, at the same time, I think Marty is, again, someone that I think would win in most endgame scenarios. Obviously, the question is, how does he get there? Because I do think it's going to be a tough road. However, he has been very proven in competitions at this point. He's won 2 HOHs in a veto. He's the most decorated person on this cast. And while BB Can has been trying to change up the formula to not make comps as predictable, I will say that I have more faith in Marty's comp ability than I do with anyone else on the rest of this cast. That, and also, like, he's not even the direct target for next week, it doesn't seem. Where, while, like, a Betty and a Summer might potentially target Marty, most of the rest of the house wants Gino or Jace gone first before him. And even in the case of, like, Kevin and Helena, these people in the middle, I mean, I think they would want to target even Hermon before they target Gino and Jace, who they want to target before Marty. So again, like, Marty is pretty well protected from a decent amount of the house, at least, again, as of the point he won HOH. Now, again, like, I could very much see Marty blowing up his game through this HOH. I mean, that has been the norm of this season. But also, Marty's just not that good of a player, I think. Again, like, when we're talking about the social strategy element of the game, again, him flipping on Gino and Kyle's during the HOH was just a terrible move. Really put a lot of the brunt of that move onto him, despite it being so many people that flipped there. It constantly leaks information and really just can't lie in the game. And again, like, Marty has a lot of holes in his game. However, again, I think he's in a position now to where if he's able to get near the end game, he's going to easily comp out and probably win the season. So despite me not thinking he's the greatest player in the world, again, I do think he is a somewhat likely winner at this point. So again, he's here at number 4. Now number 3, and for me the top 3 were pretty locked in. I think these are the 3 most likely winners in my eyes. However, at number 3, we actually have someone that I was debating putting at number 1 before the preliminary talks about noms here. And at number 3, I do have Josh. And again, like, Josh here seemed to be the best position in the house coming out of the double eviction. I mean, he's someone that is playing both sides. He's in the middle along with Kevin and Helena. And while he is on the bottom of that grouping, and Kevin and Helena definitely want to take him out before that final 3, I still think that is a decent spot to be in, especially when he has what seems to be the full allegiance of the Hermon, Moose, Betty, Summer side, where they think he's solidly with them, with Hermon and Moose both thinking that Josh is one of their closest allies, while also having this relationship with Marty that seemed to be strong coming into this week. He wasn't a target for Gino and Jace, so it's like, again, he seemed to be in a very good spot coming into this round. And then now, all of a sudden, Marty is talking about targeting Josh, where like he's talking about like during the double eviction, Josh tricked me into voting for Gino, and like obviously we don't know, like we haven't seen any of this, but this is like a radical turn here that Marty is now all of a sudden really targeting Josh. Now, really, who knows what's going to happen here, because Josh can win veto, and even if that isn't the case, then like Josh still isn't guaranteed to go home. And that is why he's still here at number 3. But I mean, that is a very precarious spot to be in. I think it is going to be a tough road for him this day, but not impossible. And again, like it's not like he's dead to rights if he's on the block. And I still think he has a lot of win equity to where he is someone that, again, is also very well liked in the house. Pretty much everyone loves Josh, despite the fact that he doesn't do as much active work as I would like him to. And really, that's my biggest flaw of Josh as a player. I just feel like he's too passive. He's just not active enough, which ironically, like him being nominated by Kyle, despite that putting him in direct danger at that point, was actually probably one of the best things that could have happened to him. That kind of forced him to play the game a bit more, because like before that, he was someone that was like being left out of a lot of alliances, despite the fact that everyone really liked him. And since then, he's been kind of on and off with playing the game, but like recently he's been a bit more on. But again, like I just think as a whole, he's a bit too passive of a player, but he's still a really likable figure that I think would win in most scenarios at the end. I think he is one of the better position players if he's able to get out this week, which again, this seems to be a danger spot for him with Marty wanting to target him, which again, I still don't really get the rationale for that. But again, I still have a level of faith in Josh's ability to get through this week and his overall game potential, and that's why he's still up here at number 3 despite being the potential target. Now number 2, and this is another weird one because I expect this person to drop significantly after Tanisha went home. This is someone that I'll be honest, like I've never been as high on, especially as a player, as most other people, though it does seem like they are, again, still in a decent spot, and that person is Summer. Again, like just somehow Summer seems to just be skating by this game, not being targeted. I think Summer should be one of the safest people on her side. Again, like her side of Betty, Hermon, and Moose. She should be the safest of that 4. Again, Hermon and Moose are looked at as big threats in the game. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, like they just talk about Betty being a more dangerous player than Summer. And that is insane, considering, again, Summer is also someone that is very well liked by most of the house. Is someone that is one of the more active players on the board here through having these relationships with obviously her side, but then also with like a Gino and a Marty and a Kevin and a Helena. And like while those relationships are starting to wane at this point, I still think she does decent work in positioning herself in the game. And again, like I think she probably has one of the easier paths in terms of skating her way to the end at this point. However, there's 2 major knocks for me. First up is her overall comp ability. She doesn't seem to be that good at comps. Mind you, she's supposedly throwing a lot of them, but then she's also like telling people she's throwing them, which is really bad. So again, not much faith in her comp ability in terms of her being able to comp her way to the end. But also, I mean, back to her telling people about her throwing comps, I think that leads to my biggest complaint with Summer that I've talked about many times on my live streams, that I just don't think Summer's that good of a player. Like, I think Summer is very much lacking strategically. Again, I think she's playing a good game, but I think in terms of her overall ability in most houses, I don't really see it personally. I mean, I think she's one of these players that's going to tell you like it is. Like, she's going to tell you what she is thinking. And like, while she might act deceivious at points, she's going to tell you that she is being deceivious. I like her telling people that she's going to throw comps. I think her blatantly targeting Kyle was not an optimal move, but it ends up working out for her just because like everyone else hated Kyle. Where I think if she had the same level of vendetta for anyone else, I don't think she would have been able to hide it and possibly would have put a target on her back had that person been more well liked. I also feel like in terms of her telling Gino to target Kyle, I mean, this is something that she gets so much credit for on the show, and I completely disagree with this, where like this backfires on Summer, to where Gino talks about how pissed off he is that Summer is even trying to get him to nominate Kyle. While he does eventually nominate Kyle down the road, it's not really due to anything that Summer actually did. It was really more so due to information that Helena told Gino that made him change his mind. And really just as a whole, again, like I don't really have much faith in Summer's overall strategic ability. Like I think she is someone that is very good socially, and I think has a level of deviousness in her that can lead to her making some pretty decent moves here and there. But I think in terms of the overall grasp on the strategic game of Big Brother, I don't think it's quite all there. But again, she is still in one of the better positions in the house, and I think she probably would have a decent chance of winning a jury vote. So again, she's here at number 2. Now number 1, the number 1 player for BB 10 here is, again, someone that I'm still like, I think they're in the best spot right now to win the game, but it's still like very wonky. But at number 1, we do have Kevin. And again, Kevin is essentially in the center of the house at this point. Obviously, he does have this alliance with Helena and Josh that are playing the middle. He has good relations with people on both sides of the house and really created those sides. Again, last week with the Tanisha vote, he actively does it in a way that creates these two separate sides, hoping that he's forcing them to go after each other. It was very impressive work there. However, I don't know if it's working out exactly as planned, especially if Marty ends up going for Josh here. I feel like that's another chink in Kevin's game, again, right after he had just lost Jess, which is another pretty important number for him. I do think he is starting to potentially lose numbers in the game. And while he is still having these two sides potentially go after each other, he's still someone that's not 100% safe. I mean, I think Hermon is someone that would potentially target Kevin had he won power, especially considering Hermon's relationship with Gino. So again, it's not like Kevin is 100% safe at this point, but I feel like Kevin is the person that I have the most faith in as a player of the social strategy elements of the game here. I mean, he is someone that has shown very, very impressive game ability in him building this middle contingent and him setting up these two sides. And I think he knows how to manage his threat level. He knows how to manage his relationships. I mean, there's been a lot of comparisons recently to Daniel Reyes in how he's playing, and I do see those comparisons. Him trying to keep this secret final 2 and maneuver through the game that way. And again, it is very impressive if he's able to execute on it. It's just that as of right now, it's like, again, it's not 100% secure that he's going to be able to do that. I also feel like in terms of jury votes, like I do think Kevin is a likely winner, especially if he's against Helena, which is his current plan. But I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for like a Marty or Hermon to eventually squeeze in there. And at that point, I don't know if he would win those scenarios. And also, we really haven't seen much of Kevin trying to win competitions at this point. I mean, we don't know his overall comp ability, where he hasn't won a competition at this point. And with these comp beasts around him, again, these Martys, Hermons, even a Jacey, even a Moose. I mean, you got Gino. I mean, like, there's a lot of comp beasts in this house that could spell a lot of danger for him, both in terms of beating him at the end, but also in terms of just outpositioning him by the end. So again, like, this is definitely not a secure number 1. I mean, this house is just too turbulent to really have someone way, way out in front. But again, I will say I have the most faith in Kevin's overall strategic ability. I think him and Hermon and like kind of Josh are the best players on the board at this point. And again, no one except for maybe Hermon is directly targeting Kevin next week. But in terms of his overall endgame potential, I do think it can be a lot more rocky, especially if him and Helena don't start to kick it up and win some competitions. But as of right now, I do find Kevin's game pretty impressive. Considering he's one of the safer people on the board, he does still land here at number 1. So there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Big Brother Canada. Obviously, when the season finishes, you can expect a season review of BB Can 10 along with a player ranking as well. Also in the near future, we have Australian Survivor ending this week, to where also expect the season review and play ranking of that moving forward. Also, we're nearing the merge of Survivor 42, and with that comes the mid-season power ranking of that as well. So again, all of those things coming up. Also, if you want to hear my thoughts on BB Can 10 as the season is running, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/TheMarineReview, where usually around 11 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays and Wednesdays, I usually stream there and talk about whatever there is to talk about. So stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.